As you might have heard, there was an accident some couple of months ago. Two hams were working on a tower, and the tower rotted at the base and fell over. And the result was one ham was killed and one ham was seriously injured. And it makes us all kind of take pause about this. I mean, I had to do tower work, and I'm like inspecting it like with a, with a magnifying glass to make sure nothing rotted out, because I'm going up on this thing. So this morning, we are lucky to have Jim Idelson, K1IR, who's going to talk about tower safety and some of the things we need to do, because there have been a couple of deaths over the years of high-level amateur operators where something went wrong. And when you're working in the tower business, when something goes wrong, it's usually a bad thing.
Thank you, Mitch. Okay, everybody. Nice to have you all here today. It's a tough topic, right? It's a tough topic, but it needs to be talked about. This is Paul Bittner, W0AIH. W0AIH was a very avid contester, and he lost his life last year, October 31, almost exactly a year ago, working on his own towers. There was a bit of a flurry of activity around that time when people talking about what can we do better, what can we do differently, and then it kind of died off. The chatter went away. It came back up again in July of this year when we lost Joe. Joe and Mike Raincourt were climbing a tower to take it down. 40 feet of Roan 25, had one set of guy wires. They went up, they took the guy wires off, and the tower lost balance. It wasn't able to support both of them, and it came down. We'll talk more about that problem in a bit. So I emailed the YCCC reflector, and I put out this message saying, is this a big problem? 2 deaths in 1 year. That seems to be an issue. What can we do about it? And I got this answer. It was from my good friend Dennis. Dennis is in the back of the room right there. Dennis said, hey, why don't you do a presentation about it? So I got volunteered. I thought about it, and I felt absolutely this is a worthwhile thing to be doing something about. So I thought a little bit about how to go about this. I came up with this framework for the analysis. Obviously, any death is a big deal, but the question is, over all of our community, the number and frequency that we see, is it a big, huge problem, or is it infrequent, and should we rally to do something about it? Second piece of the framework was, once we find out what's going on, can we identify some root causes, some basic things that are happening that if we could address them, that it would improve the situation. And then finally, what can we do to reduce and eliminate the problem? Okay, so the first thing I always do when I'm getting into any sort of project like this is see what other people have already done. Has anybody looked into this previously? And the first thing we find is cell tower deaths was investigated in depth in 2012. This was kind of an in-depth journalistic investigation of what was going on with what was perceived to be a high level of fatalities in the construction and maintenance of cell towers. And what they found that it was very high rate of problem. But what I learned in reading this is that there are statistics out there. There are people who track these kinds of things. There are standards organizations. There are all kinds of things that we could potentially learn from in looking at our own community and what's going on there. Okay. In the government side of things, we have this org chart here. All right, let's see. Department of Labor. Underneath the Department of Labor, there's OSHA. Everybody's familiar with OSHA? I'll talk about that in a minute. There's another group called Bureau of Labor Statistics. And outside, this is not government, ANSI, the American National Standards Institute. Well, over here, Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks occupations, everything to do with occupations. How many people are in a certain occupation? What's their average wage? Are they located in the Northeast or the Southwest? They keep all these different statistics. OSHA is all about safety in the workplace, safety and health in the workplace. They create standards, and the standards that they put out there are mandatory standards, and they also do investigations of accidents. So they learn from the accidents and they modify the standards to help improve the situation. Well, OSHA gets together with Bureau of Labor Statistics and they produce a thing called the Census of Fatal Occupational Injuries. So it's a combination of the fatality information that comes from OSHA and the number of workers and things like that that they understand from the research that they do on their own. They create this CFOI, this thing, which is, CFOI calculates fatality rates and they normalize them so that you can compare the riskiness of one occupation to another. Fatalities per 100,000 full-time equivalent workers is what they calculate for every different occupation. So if you're a bread baker, you know, there's a fatality rate for bread bakers. It's not as high as for cell tower workers. Across all occupations together, the annual rate per 100,000 full-time equivalent workers is 3.6. So you have a 3.6 in 100,000 chance of dying on the job, kind of overall, across all occupations in the course of a year, all right? But let's take a look at what we care about. In the commercial tower climbing business, there are about 300,000 towers in the US. There are about 5,100 full-time equivalent workers. Everybody understand the concept of full-time equivalent? If you have two part-time workers that are both working 50%, the two of them together are one full-time equivalent. Okay. When you look at this, if you multiply 5,100 workers times 50 weeks a year of work and 40 hours a day of work, you get this big number of 10 million worker hours. Okay? And the number of deaths in the research that they had done way back in 2012, over 9 years, they lost 93 people, and there were it was averages 10 deaths per year. When you do the numbers, it comes out to roughly 200 fatalities per 100,000 workers. Okay, so that's that normalized number that we're talking about. Now, how about ham radio? Okay, amateur tower climbing. We did some work as part of this project to take a stab at how many ham radio towers there are in the United States. That's a separate topic. I can tell you about that later. But we feel pretty confident about this number. It's in this 38 to 40,000 range. And if you think about it, we have 800,000 licensed hams. You've got how many of them are inactive? How many of them are technicians and probably may not own a tower? So this 40,000 is around 5%. We estimated, for the purpose of this analysis, that 24 hours of climber time is needed per tower per year. Does that sound like a lot? Yeah. It's exactly. Well, that's good because it makes the numbers that we calculate very conservative. Okay, if we assume that they're up there a lot longer, then the fatality rate, the number of workers is the denominator of this equation. So what happens is if that goes up, then the fatality rate in comparison to these others goes down. So you'll see in a second. So we estimated, based on those numbers, that we get 456 full-time equivalent ham radio tower climbers in over a year. Now we know that that's actually thousands of people doing a little bit of work themselves. But in terms of the amount of tower work that's being done, and in order to compare it to the other profession, we needed to do that. So we had these 2 deaths that we talked about already this year, right? So you run those numbers and you get roughly double. Okay, and that's with this number at 24. Everyone who's seen this has said to me, 24 is way too high. So if you lower this to 12, let's say you just lower this to 12 in half, this number doubles. Okay, you understand the relationship, all right?
How did you get 38,000 towers?
38,000 towers is, we did it by direct observation, actually.
You counted from a satellite?
We used Google Earth, and we did hundreds of ham QTHs. We looked at them, and then we estimated a little more, assumed there were a few that we couldn't see, And we feel really pretty good about it. Because when you see one, when they're there, it's very obvious. And when they're not going to be there, if you see an apartment building at that location, there's not going to be a tower there. So it's not that hard. Okay, we're probably going to do a separate article on that topic. How many ham radio towers in the United States? Okay, remember these guys. Along the way, the research revealed some disturbing news, and that is, I have to move these two guys over to fit these two guys in. So in the last 12 months, we lost 4, not 2, nationwide. Okay, this guy, Lee Parsons, was working on a tower in his own yard somewhere in Pennsylvania. And Ken Waddell, I believe this happened in Tennessee. Ken Waddell was the tower climber. He was doing some work for a friend. He is a professional tower climber, and he did some stuff wrong. Okay, all right, so it's not 2, it's 4. And what happens to the numbers? This now becomes 878. The news is not good. I decided to take another look at something else. All right, let's look at another activity that people consider to be dangerous. Skydiving. Okay, skydiving is very popular across the United States. It's the number of jumps is tracked and the number of fatalities is tracked. Turns out that 13 recorded skydiver fatalities in 2018 out of 3.3 million jumps. Okay. This number, when you do this, when you calculate this, if you want to know how many jumps does it take to get one fatality, it's this number. All right. Now, remember the 24 hours of climbing? We did an estimate. We said it's actually 4 climbs per year, per tower. So now you have 38,000 towers times 4 climbs per year. You get a number, 152,000 climbs per year. Number of fatalities was 4. Climbs per 1 fatality is 38,000. Look at this. How much? It's like 7 times worse. Everybody clear? All right. So the answer to the first question, I think is pretty clear. We have a problem that we need to address. So now, as I said, let's look into it and try to figure out what's at the root of all of this. First of all, how dangerous is working at height? Okay, you're up in the sky. How dangerous is this? There is information on that. There is a landmark study done in emergency rooms in New York City where they looked at the records of ER patients who came in from falls, and they had the information about how high they fell from. Okay, so there were, I believe 192 is the number. 192 cases of falls from height, ranging from 5 to 72 feet, and ages ranging from 4 months to 86 years old.
A little young.
Yes, that's young, but it's actually, there's a predominance of very young kids in the data, and it turns out that kids are much more resilient, and they don't suffer the same high mortality rates from the falls from the same height as full-grown people. And it actually makes this data look better than it would be for us all falling. All right, okay. So some of the findings: 28% overall mortality rate of all these 192. 23% were DOA or died in the ER. Injury severity and the mortality correlate directly to the height of the fall. The higher the fall, the worse off you are. Mortality rate was much higher for adults than it was for children. We talked about that. Okay, so here's a chart. All right, getting right down to it. If you fall from a certain height, what is your percentage of mortality? So at 40 feet, 20% chance that you were not going to make it. Just 15 feet higher, 55 feet, it's now 50%. So 55 feet or higher is not good. All right, now let's look at our own safety history. This is a list of all of the fatalities, all of the fatal incidents that occurred in the United States for hams on towers starting 2003 until today. Okay. Some of the data that I've added in here is what type of tower, a little bit about what happened, and what was the cause, what we think the actual cause was. We added to this data some additional information. These were very serious injuries. These are situations where somebody, experienced something very similar to what happened in the fatal situations, had serious injuries, but did survive the fall. Okay, all right. So what types of towers were involved in these? 13 out of, what was it, 13, 16, 18 were Roan towers. Okay, I suspect that of these three, I believe that more than one of them is probably another guide towers as well. But I'm not 100% sure. So predominantly, we're talking about guide towers. What happened? All right, 7 of them were free fall. Somebody fell off, literally fell off the tower without any restraints and fell to the ground. The other big number here is this red, which is they fell where they were attached to tower. The tower was falling, and they fell with the tower. Okay, so if you deal with those two, and by the way, I'm going to give this a name. This is what we'll call the deadly duo in tower fatalities in ham radio. Okay, and we'll talk about what that means. Okay, so 8 were during maintenance of the tower. 11 were during installation or removal of the tower itself. Okay. Now, if we break it apart and look at what type of incident, what type of fatality, what actually happened during installation or removal, we see that it was almost all fell with the tower and attached. All right, and guess what? When it was maintenance, there was one of those, but the rest were all free fall. So there's some strong correlation here of something going on, right? All right. Okay. When you look at falling with a tower, the root cause is generally there was something unsafe about the tower that was being climbed. I mean, if a tower is safe to climb, it's going to be rigid. You're going to get on the tower. It's going to be solid as a rock, and you can climb up and do whatever you're going to do, right? And free fall is all about not being attached properly. Okay, it's about not using PPE. PPE is the industry term for personal protection equipment. And it's all about standards around, being hooked in and what distance you can fall without problems, all those things. And the third category, which I didn't talk about much, is doing something unsafe. There are certain types of accidents which aren't the predominant ones, but situations where you do something that without the right tools or the right people or the right skills. Okay. All right. So then when you look at the root causes, you can see that climbing an unsafe tower and personal protection equipment basically predominate the root causes. All right. This is the trend of ham tower fatal accidents or fatal incidents by year in that data that we were looking at. And notice that it ain't going down, it's going up. All right, this is not good. This one here, there were 3 different things that happened. It's all in the data, but I mean, mostly it was 1 a year, and then all of a sudden it's kind of creeping up to 2 a year. But in the commercial tower world, from that time, from 2012 in particular, when they rose the alarm, they started yelling about this in public, things happened and the trend started to go down. Okay, so that should give us hope. Actually, that's the slide. This slide is intended to give us a little hope. I think we can fix this. So we've got this concept of a deadly duo. Two things that are at the root of most of the problem we have. One is climbing unsafe towers, and the second is free climbing. All right. Does anybody know what free climbing is?
Without the harnesses or without...
Okay, these are all good answers. The standards people, the OSHA says if at any moment during your work during the day, you're up at height, and you are not 100%, you're not attached. You have free climbed. And the whole day is a free climb, or the whole tower climb is a free climb. Okay, so you could be wearing all the stuff, but if you unclip for a moment, you have now free climbed. And that makes sense, because that's the moment that you're going to fall, right? Okay. This is not about the free climb. This is for the first one. Knowingly climbing unsafe guide towers. All right. Guess what? Knowingly. So what do we do when we take down a tower? There are certain things that have to be done when you take down a guide tower. You have to take the guys off. All right? You shouldn't be laughing, because it happens so much. Basically, we put the tower in a state that is unsafe, and then we scamper up the tower and pull the sections off. And then when we are building a tower, putting one up, we may do some similar things. It's more common that we see accidents during. I've seen more accidents during demolition or removal than during putting things up. But there's also a category of things like field day and de-expeditions, where you bring some tower and you put it up with what? What do you use for guy wire? Ropes. Stretchy ropes. And there are any number of cases, both fatal and non-fatal, where a tower came down and somebody got severely injured because they used the wrong stuff. They didn't build a tower that can withstand climbing. A tower needs to be properly guided. It is true, though, that the permanent guys during construction and removal have to be removed at some point. At that moment, you put temporary guys on. And temporary does not mean poor. All right, that's the thing you have to think about. All right, that tower with the temporary guys on it should feel as rock solid and be as rock solid as it was with the permanent guys. And this is not something that everybody thinks of intuitively. They think the intuition is it only has to stay up for a little while. I'm going to do the job quick. It'll be done soon. I'll be off the tower, soon. And they end up being off the tower, but not the way they want to. So proper anchors, wire rope, and reliable terminations. Rope is not good enough. Guying at standard heights, or more conservative. Okay, during that construction process, rather than having the 30 feet, it's okay to have 10 or 15 feet between two sets of guys. Okay. So here's a tower that I took down with Mark Pride. Mark here? No, he was here a second ago. This is a tower that was in Framingham. It was actually much higher at when we started, but at this point there was like 40 feet left, and there was one set of guys here. So what did we do? We attach a temporary set of guys here. This is right below the second section down. And then we moved these guys down here. And then we removed these top two sections with this set of guys in place. I'm sorry, with this set and this set in place. Two sets of guys are still on this thing. Then we removed this upper set of temporary guys, removed this section, and removed these temporary guys. But at this point, we are, we're down, we're at ground level. This was in concrete. Okay, and at the base, we actually ended up cutting this. There was a mast that was inside, and we had to cut it down. So while we were on that tower, it was guided with even one or two sets of guys, and we were not trusting the base. By the way, here in New Hampshire, the accident that we heard about in July, we heard a lot of discussion about the base. The base had become corroded. The base had been repaired. I don't know what all was true, but that tower had been up for years and years and years with proper guying, even though the base was in that shape. So had we put temporary guys, steel guys, out to those same guy anchors, that tower would have stayed up long enough for us to get up, get it down safely. Okay, free climbing. So here's some pictures of free climbing. Free climbing in the 70s. Look at this guy. The attitude about tower climbing was more of a, very cavalier. You were kind of a hero if you free climbed. The attitude was really that kind of thing. Here's a video of a fellow. So
I'm going to the top.
Yeah, you
this
shoot
guy
there.
is,
Go for it,
look what he's
man.
doing. And he's got buddies on the ground who
420
are
at the
egging
top
him
of
on.
his 80
Go,
feet
go.
with a ratchet strapped around him.
He's nuts.
He is.
All right. This guy is, I don't know if he's actually strapped in. He may have a waist belt on. Here's a guy, this guy isn't attached at all. Look at this guy. Field day. This is a lot of field day. Okay. I'll say it right now. One of the things that your club should do is say no tower climbing on field day. 0. There's no reason. You just figure out some other way to get an antenna up in the air. The WRTC in 2014 did how many towers? 50 towers? 65 towers, no climbing involved. They had a great event. That's the way you got to be thinking. Okay, here's another one. There's another one. There's another one. That's me. Can you tell? So here's what's wrong here. I have just a positioning lanyard on. I have the ability to be 100% attached hanging on my waist here. These are supposed to be hooked on, but they weren't hooked on when I had the picture taken. Okay. So to prevent the problem of free fall, you got to observe this concept called 100% attach. 100% attach is very simple. Okay, you are wearing a harness. Let me talk about harnesses. This is a good point to talk about harnesses. Okay. This is the 70s harness. Okay, anybody recognize this? Leather lineman's belt, right? And it's not a harness. It's just a belt, and it has one lanyard. So this is what I used when I was a kid, and I had to go over somebody's house, and I would repair an antenna or installed an antenna on somebody's tower, and I got the old antenna as payment, which was just thrilling, right? This belt was just like, everybody had these back then. OSHA made a lot of changes. Leather became illegal because a leather is not a controlled manufacturing process. You don't know how strong the leather is. Okay, so this thing goes. The next belt that I got was this one. This is from a company called Petzl. It's also a waist belt, okay? It's very lightweight, it's very strong. This nylon, strapping is very, very strong, and it's really good. I climbed with this since 1997 until just a couple months ago when I did this. It has the dual attach kind of thing. This is, let's see if I have that here. Well, I have the ability when I was on the tower, this ring right here would have 2 things coming off it, and I would move one up at a time and remove the other one and go up, alternating it up. But if I fell, I would fall and be hanging from my waist. Okay. OSHA says that's no good. Gone. So this is now this is a current harness. This one is called a full body harness, and it has straps over your shoulders. It has a very important D-ring on the back here. It has a belt. The belt is not considered to be one of the safety features of the harness, interestingly enough. The belt is really more for convenience. The way the harness works is it's the shoulders that hold you up, and then these go around your legs. So this strap here holds all the weight, and you really are being held by your legs if you fall. And you are attached to the tower by a strap that goes from the back behind you to the tower. And what does that strap look like? That strap is this. Okay, this is called a dual fall arrest harness, or lanyard. okay? It attaches to that ring on the back, upper back, and as you climb the tower, you clip one on, and you climb up, and then you're clipping on another one, and you undo the one below, and you go up alternating like this. So if you ever fall, first of all, the fall would probably put all the weight on, all the stress on one of these. And you see this bungee stuff here? So there's a bunginess, but then at a certain point, it starts to tear inside. It's a one-time use tool, but it basically takes the deceleration forces down, okay? So you don't suddenly stop, okay? Okay. I was talking about standards. OSHA specifies all this stuff. OSHA actually doesn't have really great in-depth standards for harnesses and processes. This group, ANSI has much more in-depth stuff. So all the manufacturers mainly point to the ANSI standards. I wanted to make one other point. Sometimes I get feedback here that says, well, we're not covered by OSHA. And there's those laws, they're mandatory for them, but not for us. And this highly recommended, but not mandatory for ANSI. Does anybody know there's a set of laws that does apply equally to commercial world and to the amateur world about falling? It's Newton's laws. And that should be your motivation to do the right thing here. All right. So here I am. Let's see if this thing works. Here I am climbing my tower. So I got my fall arrest thing, my harness is on. Find a place. And note that I'm going around guy wires here. All right. And I have my positioning harness, this red one here. That's this thing here. This is the positioning harness, or positioning lanyard. So I let that go, but I'm 100% attached. The whole rule is 100% attached. And you're only attached if it's one of these hooks attached around something that can handle 5,000 pounds of downward force. Okay? So, for example, notice where I'm putting this hook. It's on the leg of the tower. So yeah, it's still on the rung. The rung is holding it, but it's stronger than putting it just in the center of the rung.
Okay. How much longer does it take to climb the tower now?
Well, I'm going to talk about that actually. Okay. Unsafe maneuvers. All right. This is that last category. So we talked about the problem of unsafe towers. We talked about the free fall problem. Now we're talking about, did you take on something that you maybe shouldn't have? Here are two examples in the data that is in this report. So these people were putting up a 30-foot high antenna support against the side of a house. There were a few people on the ground lifting it up, and there was somebody standing up on the roof to kind of catch it and pull it in when it went vertical. And they were going to, it's going to be house bracketed, basically. So what happened? The structure falls on nearby 13.8 kV power lines. 3 fatalities. And they were all members of the same family. Okay. Here's another one, a little different. This is a situation where a guy was taking down a big 40-meter Yagi, 325-pound antenna, on a 100-foot guide tower. One man on the tower, a few ground crew, and what I understand is kind of limited tools. The antenna falls while he unbolts the antenna from the mast. It falls. It hits an upper guy wire. The guy wire breaks, and the other 2 guy wires pull it down. And so the thing folds, and he loses his life as the tower crumbles. Okay. The only answer I can tell you for this is we have to work smart. However you estimate the size of the job that you're going to do, double it. Double the tools, the knowledge, and also recognize if it's a job that's outside of your skills. So if it's not something you can do, don't do it. Okay. All right. So what's important here at the end of this, I want to say 85% of the incidents that I was able to do research on would be eliminated if we address just those two, the two things. Climbing a roan, or a guide tower that's not properly guide, and second, not observing 100% attached. Those two things, we solve those two things, 85% of incidents are gone. So how do we do this? So this is now the important part. The important part is now that this small group here knows a little bit about this. There's thousands, remember how many full-time equivalent tower workers do we have? And those full-time equivalent are actually representing 10,000 people probably. We need to get the word out. We need to do it at multiple levels. One level is individual. So every one of you, I hope, if you own one of these climbing rigs, you should not use it anymore. You should just make a personal commitment now that you're not going to do that. You're going to spend the $300 or whatever it is and buy the right kind of climbing gear. Okay, so I talked about acting at the individual level. I think there's a role for our clubs and local people to help us be more safety conscious and build a safety awareness for, or a safety attitude. And then finally, the national organizations that we all know about have a role here as well. So thinking ahead, focusing on the job, being patient, being aware, being responsible, being strong. This stuff applies not just to the climber. This applies to the tower owner. Owner should say, if some people show up and they don't look like they're in the right state to be doing this job, whatever that means, they shouldn't do the job. You should say, I don't want to do it today. And if you are a member of a crew, a ground crew, if you're going over to help and you see stuff that doesn't look right, it's a responsibility to speak up and do something about it. And the culture that we have to develop is that that's okay and it's encouraged, rather than that culture that we saw in the 70s slide of, winging it. Okay, so here's what I did. I say, at K1IR, here's my old picture. This was April of last year. This was this year. I've got my stuff on. I'm 100% attached. I got the right shoes on. I've got my helmet, all this stuff. And you know what? It wasn't that hard to get the stuff and start to use it. But, so there's the stuff. It cost me $300. But, Mitch, your point, 3 times the amount of time to climb the tower. 3 times as much to transition from one spot to another on the tower.
100-footer?
This is 80 feet. So there are these costs, but I just decided I have to accept those costs. It's going to take me longer to get the job done, but I'm much more likely to have dinner with my family. So there's this commitment concept. All right. Okay, local groups. Okay, so what can the local group do? This is all about local support. It's support with knowledge. It's support with teaching and mentoring the right skills. It's about having the tools. In the same way that we today loan out a gin pole in a club, we can loan out other things. And I'm going to talk about one that we have put together. And by the way, an important point I want to make is that I think you can see that the changes we need to make are not that complicated, and they can be done by any of us. These are not things that imply that hams can no longer do their own tower work. These are problems, approaches that anybody can take. So you don't necessarily have to bring in the professionals to do the job. You can do it yourself. Okay, this is Mark Pride put this together. K1RX, he called it the K1JGA safety guy technique for tower takedowns. Basically, it's a kit of temporary guy stuff that you can use. And so we've put one of these together, and we'll start to loan it out to people who want to do this kind of work. Okay, at the national level, we've got a potential for the league to be involved here, to do the tracking and reporting, to keep this issue in the news, to act as a repository for the kinds of best practices that make this work safe, and to be a megaphone, essentially, to get the word out. Here's another idea. Did you know that the anybody knows what the NCVEC is? NCVEC manages the question pools. Right now, 2 questions in the pool have anything to do with tower safety. Okay, so risk of tower work are far too high, we need to act. 3 root causes, 2 of which are the deadly duo. Climbing unsafe, free climbing and unsafe tower. We know how to fix this problem. Climb a safe tower, 100% attach. Success depends on creating a culture that values safety. So that's what I view my role right now as, to be doing this presentation everywhere. I intend to create a version of this presentation that's not so personal for me, but more of a generic one that any club can deliver, and that we're going to get this out to every club out there and get people thinking about this and try to get that mindset shifted. So I ask all of you, I hope this inspired you to think a little bit about something, whether you're a member of a ground crew, a tower owner, or a climber yourself, about what you can do. I had a lot of help putting this presentation together, and I want to thank all those people. This isn't even up to date anymore. There are others. Hang on, Mitch. I have a microphone. So Dennis is coming to you with a microphone for the video. Is it on?
It looks like it.
Okay. I bet it is.
Did you find any difference in the amount of time someone is actually on the tower? In other words, if they're climbing, is it more dangerous than if they're tethered in at the top where they have to do a lot of work? Because I've been thinking along the lines of, when I have to do work, I want to go rent a lift instead of having to climb the
Right.
tower. Not that I trust lifts all that much either, but I'm looking at...
There's evidence from the commercial world that the fatalities occur in what they call when the climber is in transition. When you're climbing or when you're moving around an object, and you may have seen, I don't know, there's lots of stuff on the web showing pictures or videos of professional tower climbers climbing around an antenna mount, these big antenna mounts up on big towers, or guy brackets or whatever. Those are the times that people lose their lives. And it's all in the data that I was able to capture about amateur incidents as well. It was the same thing. As he was, quote, as he was going around the guys at the 90-foot level, he lost his, lost grip of the tower and came down. And that is not uncommon. So yes, once you're in, even if it's a positioning harness, a positioning lanyard, not a real attach, you're probably not going to fall. Okay. Other questions? Oh, come on.
Jim, on the national level, the ARRL has certification programs for emergency communications. Wouldn't it make sense to have a certification?
It might very well. I've been in touch with a couple of providers of that kind of stuff. There are several organizations around the country that focus, of course, on professional, tower climbing, but there is definitely some interest in putting together something that the regular ham on the street could afford to do. So, and by the way, I think they consider it to be a service, a public service, and it gives them some good cred in their industry. Let me also point out that another thing I'm trying to do is talk to tower manufacturers, our dealers that sell equipment, the manufacturers of the safety gear, harnesses and stuff, and get them connected into this in a way that they're adding some value. Maybe we get a recommended ham package that you can buy new at a reasonable price for safety that has all the right features. Okay. Who else?
I got a comment.
don't you say who you are?
My name's Vinny Matera, and one Ian Z.
Nice to meet you.
On your harness there, I worked with the fire department. I'm now retired, but there is a date on it,
Correct.
and you only have so many years.
Correct.
So even though you buy a used harness, you got to check that date. It could be in A1 shape, but once it's out of date, it's no longer.
So, correct. This is
So I
correct.
just
This is
wanna
something we
bring
have
it
to
up
consider
because
as
you
as
didn't
hand.
mention that,
Right.
so
No, you're correct.
okay.
Yeah. I think we have to wrap it up. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your attention.